Have you ever felt like there's something that is a part of your life, maybe it's something that's a part of your past or your psyche or a habit you have or something like that, that just seemed like it was too much? And when I say it's too much, I mean just too much in general. I mean too much for you, too much for kind of your ability to kind of deal with it, morally, or maybe kind of the guilt of it, or maybe you even think it's too much for God. I think oftentimes we will have these little feelings where there are these little aspects of our lives that just seem insurmountable, like we can't get over them. But if we were to actually look at why we feel that way, what we might discover is that part of the reason why it seems so insurmountable is because our thought process starts and stops with what we think we can get over ourselves. And because we can't fathom a world where we can get over this thing in our lives, we just kind of learn to live with it. When that happens, it can lead to all kinds of things. It can lead to us carrying this guilt, this weight. It can impact our relationships with other individuals. It can impact our relationship with God, because we feel like there's this aspect of us that's somehow dirty, that's somehow impure, that we can't let go of. Well, one of the things that we see throughout the Bible, throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, is that the redemption of God is not dependent on our ability to be able to foresee our own salvation. The fact that we can't see the pathway out of whatever we're struggling with doesn't mean that God doesn't see it. And actually, in fact, more often than not, it is us acknowledging that we can't see a way out of our own problem that allows God to be able to do what it is He wants to do. One of the books in the Bible that sometimes is very difficult to read is Ezekiel, and it has all kinds of obscure things in it. It's because a lot of it are visions or things that God Himself is bringing to the prophet of Ezekiel and saying, here is this thing that I'm trying to present to you so you can understand the nature of who I am and what I want for my people. Now, Ezekiel also has some very odd stuff. It perhaps has one of the oldest recordings of somebody lighting their poop on fire. It's in Ezekiel 4:12. Look it up. But today I want to talk about something a little bit more serious. I want to talk about this concept of God and God alone being able to redeem and restore that which is dead. You're going to sit here and read some things out of Ezekiel 37. As you go through Ezekiel 37, what I want you to look for are these images of how this relates to our life today. I want you to look and see how you can picture that God is in control and that through God and God alone, He has the power to bring back to life that which we would have long since considered dead. The pathway to restoration has to start with that acknowledgement of God's dominion over our lives. Because only then is God going to really be able to show us how He is able to do something that we couldn't do on our own. You see, it's actually that sense of helplessness and acknowledging that we're helpless that allows God to really be able to amplify and emphasize His goodness and His grace and His mercy in our lives by acknowledging that I can't bring these dead bones back to life, but you can. We're able to see God's power. Now, Ezekiel doesn't stop there. He continues on with this vision, and as he's looking at this, he starts seeing that the bodies are becoming, reanimated, that God does in fact have the power to recreate things. But recreating isn't where it stops. You see, if that's all it was, then what that would mean is that God is basically the giant vending machine, that we go to God, that He gives us redemption, and that poof, we're restored back to who we were before, and then we just kind of go on our merry way. But there's so much more to that. You see, God's own breath actually plays a part. There's this concept, this word that you're going to see in Ezekiel, that's the haruach. And what that is it is the actual breath, the Spirit of God being endowed to these bodies. And only once the Spirit of God is endowed to the dead bodies are they complete. This applies to our own life directly because we ourselves can be restored and brought back to who we were before we had certain sins and vices in our lives. But unless something changes on the inside, we still have that root of sin inside. It is the Spirit of God with us every single day that allows us to be able to overcome what we've done in the past, that allows us to be able to be stronger, to be better, and in doing that, to reflect something that's more than just some self-help, but is actually something that is divine. When you put all of this together, you see this picture of these bones that were utterly and hopelessly dead. They were dry. There was not an ounce of life left in them. And yet God looked at even these bones and said, I can make these bones live again. But he didn't just say I can make them live again and they could carry the scars that they always have and they're just going to have to remember that. Instead, what we end up seeing through this entire vision that God gives Ezekiel is that the bones had new muscle, that they had new tendons, that there was new skin, new flesh, and so that they were entirely new creations. But then that wasn't all. That then they were endowed with the Spirit of God Himself. This is exactly the picture of what God does for us. And it's made even more beautiful when you remember that God isn't doing this because He needs us. He isn't doing it because we did something to deserve it. He's doing it simply because this is what He wills. This is what He wants. Paul categorizes this perfectly in Romans. So when we look at Romans chapter 5, we see this. For while we were still helpless, at the appointed moment, Christ died for the godly. For rarely will someone die for just a person, though for a good person, perhaps someone might even dare to die. But God proves His own love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. I love this picture of a God that looks without any kind of qualification or prerequisite and says, I know everything that you have done. I know everything about your past. I know everything in your heart, in your mind. I know all of those deep, dark places that you hope that no one will ever know about. And yet, I am still here to offer you grace and redemption because Christ didn't die for us while we were sitting here trying to become good enough or while we were trying to offer Him something. In our state that we are currently in, Christ died for us, even knowing everything that we have done and everything we ever will do. That is the picture of a God that loves you immeasurably. That is the picture of a God who desperately wants to have a relationship with you. And it all starts with exactly what we see Ezekiel saying right there in verse 3. It starts with an acknowledgement of the fact that God can do if He wills it. God can offer us grace and redemption. He can offer us all of these things and more, but we have to acknowledge that He has dominion over our lives. And if we do that, then the good news is that no matter what it is we struggle with, God can overcome, God can restore, and God can redeem. That's the lesson that we have for you today. I hope you're able to get something out of it. Until we can meet again, God bless.